This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Here is another Beyond the Big Screen teaser for episodes coming soon. I hope you enjoy and definitely tune in for the full episodes. If you want to learn more, you can head over to beyondthebigscreen.com. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon and Subscribestar. By joining on Patreon and or Subscribestar, you can help keep Beyond the Big Screen going and get many great benefits. Benefits include advertisement-free content, bonus content, and early access. The bonus content is great too. I will feature outtakes from episodes and live streaming episodes. If you join at the executive producer level, you will become just that, an executive producer of Beyond the Big Screen. You will be able to develop ideas for upcoming episodes, help find great guests, and of course have your name mentioned at the beginning or end of each episode. You won't just be a supporter, you will be a critical member of the team. Go over to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen or subscribestar.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send me an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com, or follow us on social media by searching for A2Z History. I will see you next time Beyond the Big Screen.
Today, we have some bonus content featuring the young gun himself, Billy the Kid.
What police agency, I guess you might call it, were the regulators working under? What, I guess, legal authority did they have?
They were working under the legal authority of Tunstall's attorney, Alexander McSween, who was trying to press charges against Sheriff Brady, not only for conspiracy, but also for Tunstall's murder.
And if I'm not mistaken, this sort of thing where you have an arrest warrant that turns into a hunting expedition, that's not entirely uncommon in the Old West.
Not at all. Wyatt Earp himself was also guilty of that. After the gunfight at the OK Corral, he goes on a vendetta ride with a series of arrest warrants, and he basically treats them as a license to kill.
And I think that putting yourself in that mindset that these people, it's not law enforcement as we might see it, that, you know, even though things do happen, and that they've happened quite often where police have killed people, it's generally not the express writ of law enforcement today. If you have a warrant, you can't just go kill somebody, where they're doing it all the time.
Yeah, it was very much a free-for-all, especially after Sheriff Brady is assassinated. It really becomes a free-for-all because not only the old world tensions between the Irish and the English, but also a lot of animosity between the native tribes people and the Hispanics. It doesn't take much for an argument to get going, and next thing you know, everybody is taking sides and shooting each other.
Before we move on to the next stage, the Hispanic community, how did they generally break down? Were they more in line with their co-religionists, for a lack of a better term, within the Irish, or were they going with this new group of people under Tunstall, or maybe trying to break the monopoly that Dolan and Murphy had created through the House?
They were trying to break the monopoly because even though they may have shared the same religious practices, the Irish community and the House under Murphy and Dolan, the Hispanics were seen as second-class citizens. They were not seen as equals to them.
So that's a pretty complicated time in American history. We're right after the Civil War. were getting into the railroads, the Gilded Age. What was the setting? Let's even zoom in. What's going on in New Mexico at that point? Because that's really our main theater of exploration at this point.
The New Mexico territory at that time, it was still very much an area on the make. It was considered very much abandoned desert land that very few communities were only starting to spring up, because even as far back as when the Spaniards were colonizing that part of the area, it was still a very rural area that was deemed almost impossible to live off the land. But at the same time, you also had a lot of communities of Native Americans who were able to live off that area. And then you had a lot of Hispanics that, in the wake of the creation of what we refer to as Mexico, they had established cattle ranching and horse breeding and stuff like that, because that environment is still very much ideal for cattle and for the horse trade.
That's really interesting. You should bring that up. There's, just to get our minds wrapped around that to like the Americans, that's a very wide open place to them. But there were Spaniards living there for at least a couple of 200 years before, even more. And then the Pueblos and the various Native American groups who had been living there for thousands of years.
Yeah. The Mescalero Apaches, the Chiricahua Apaches, the Navajos. There were several indigenous tribes people that called that land their home, even before the Hispanic community and the Mexican communities began establishing themselves. And then comes in that large influx of the Anglo-American and European influences following the end of the Mexican-American War in 1840.
New Mexico was still a territory at that point. You said 1912 is when it achieved statehood.
Yes, New Mexico had achieved statehood around 1912 during President Roosevelt's administration.
Now, if only that was the end of the story, but there's definitely a lot more. Before we go into some of the afterlife of Billy the Kid, maybe we could tie up a couple of the loose strings. How does the House of Dolan and the house play out after this? Do they just go on and everything's fine?
Yeah, James Dolan carries on a little bit longer, but ultimately they were already in financial trouble as soon as John Tunstall came onto the scene in 1877. So by the time Billy is supposedly dead in the beginning of the 1880s, Dolan is just kind of fades away. And a lot of the other tycoons are able to stay a little bit longer. John Chisholm certainly stayed a lot longer. And by the time New Mexico is made a state in 1912, that's when a lot of these main characters start dying off themselves, and their stories are beginning to fade away as well. Pat Garrett himself, thinking that he's killed the kid, this is going to be my ticket to the big time. He is ultimately killed in 1908, a penniless man under very mysterious circumstances on a trail road in New Mexico, in a dispute over sheep on his land.
Yeah, I would have to say, at least in my opinion, as much as I would love to see something like this, my academic mind would want to see this. I could see, across all those different jurisdictions, like just the legal framework to do that much exhuming and then to disrupt so many final resting places just to solve a historical curiosity seems a bit much.
Yeah. And also think about it from a money perspective, because how much money is made off of Billy the Kid, not just his story, but also his myth, his legend.
Yeah.
Most recently, only a couple of days ago, the Bonhams auction company acquired a series of items from that were supposedly connected to Billy the Kid. A shotgun that was the shotgun that Billy used to kill Deputy Marshal Ollinger, a Winchester rifle that was recovered from Stinking Spring that Pat Garrett used later on, and supposedly a Colt 1873 cavalry model that was taken from Stinking Spring, used by Pat Garrett, and supposedly was the revolver used to kill him. I don't know how much those items are going to make at auction, but they are projected to make at least $3 million at that auction house. The photograph, the one surviving verified photograph outside of another one that was recently found, the famous one that we know of here, that this was sold at an auction house for $2.3 million. And so not just in the world of academia, but also in Hollywood with the movies made about Billy the Kid, and even in television shows and stuff like that, there is a lot of money to be made about this fallen angel-esque character. And to have that narrative destroyed by the Brushy Bill Roberts theory, how many people are going to lose money? How many people are going to lose credibility? That's a really big question.